Hello, and welcome again to the libertarianism.uk podcast with me, your host, Andy Duncan. Today's guest is incredible. He's been my personal mentor for many years, and he's actually given me some good advice in all that time. He's called Michael McKay, of course. There he is. He's in Iowa, where I've actually been. He's in a forest in Iowa.
Yep.
I have deer running through the forest and lots of other things. Yep. And we are going to talk today about navigating your life with Austrian economics. So life navigation with Austrian economics. We're going to break the talk into three rough sections. The first section is Michael's going to introduce himself. For those of you who don't know him, he's a Lew Rockwell author. So he's going to talk about himself and then how he became a Lew Rockwell author. We're then going to talk about the key principles of Austrian economics and how and why you should use them to help you guide your life. Having got through that, we'll then talk about how you can use these principles to make you make better daily decisions, understand people's motivations better. One special section of that will be how to become a better investor and entrepreneur in the upcoming gig economy that's being driven by AI. That should give us plenty to talk about, and then we'll wrap up with some books and some podcasts on how you can further learn about Austrian economics to make your life a better thing for yourself. So, hello, Michael.
Hello, Andy. It's always good to see you.
You're looking lovely and smart there, and I love the Federal Reserve notes behind you. It's very, very good.
Yeah, they're $2 bills. It's a whole sheet. Yeah,
probably be $200 million bills in a few years' time. Okay, so for the benefit of our viewers, you recently became a Lew Rockwell author after writing occasional articles for many years. Can you tell us some more about yourself and also how you became a Lew Rockwell author?
Well, I've actually put up things on Lew Rockwell for over 10 years, and but I was invited to actually be part of the LRC blog, and particularly to focus more on health-related issues because of the pandemic that we went, the fraud pandemic that we went through. And because for the last 10 years since going on 10 years now, since I retired from owning an investment firm, I've been focusing on health-related issues, and most of my time is focused on researching health and health-related issues.
Yeah, okay. So let's get into the meat of the subject then. So Can you just give us, off the top of your head, what are the key principles of Austrian economics and how should people learn about them?
Well, to me, this is something we could talk about for a long time. And of course, you and I love to sit on the veranda and just chat for hours. And the thing about Austrian economics, let me just say more broadly, the thing about economics is that it's a very intimidating subject for most people. When I was in the money business, people would always ask me questions, and I would try to steer the conversation more toward Austrian economics, but they wanted to talk about money. Well, economics is so much more than that. And in fact, actually, I wrote an article years ago that you can find in my blog posts, and it's essentially the key point for me. Well, let me put it this way. I look at Austrian economics as giving three different layers of knowledge, and you can just approach it from any of these layers if you want. There's a surface layer, and then there's a deep layer, and then there's a deeper layer. And so to talk about them sequentially, I would just summarize that the surface layer is to remind people or to help people observe the fact that they already understand economics on a daily intuitive level, just because they're constantly organizing themselves around scarcity, property, and relationships. Those are the three key concepts that constantly every human being is dealing with all the time. They're dealing with the fact that they have to get someplace in a certain amount of time. So they're dealing with the scarcity of time. They're dealing with what's in the refrigerator and, more importantly, what's not in the refrigerator. They're dealing with their laundry. They're dealing with scarcity because scarcity is one of the primary things that we navigate through in life. And because we do that, it brings up two other very important concepts, and those are, of course, property and relationships. You know, for ourselves, we are, wired to understand property. I mean, one of the earliest words that children learn is mine. If you try to take a toy away
that's
from
my toy. That's my toy. Soldier.
Right, exactly. It's really, and it's a very intuitive concept that we all share. Every human being shares. We understand this concept of mind, and that actually starts really with our bodies. We recognize that our bodies is our primary form of property that we all own in our world. And so it's up to us to take care of it. We got to feed it. We got to, take care of it, And by the way, that becomes a much bigger issue as you get older. I mean, I'm going to have my 72nd birthday next Friday.
Geez. No, yeah, I'm 27. You're about 35, I reckon.
Yeah, I remember that. I thought you were only 29. Actually, I thought you got a little older.
No. I'd had a rough couple of weeks. I'm actually only 27.
Yeah, but priorities change as time goes on, and I'll come back to this more in a little bit, but and I'll just make one little comment about relationships and how that ties in. That has to do with the fact that we don't just have our own property. We have to recognize the property of others. We have to recognize that, and by the way, the number one form of property that we use to recognize this relationship with others is money. Most people don't think about money as property, but it is essentially just that. It is a commodity that we use for exchanging, so that I don't need to carry around a chicken to get a cup of coffee when I go out into the world. And so it is what is called fungible and fluid and liquid, and people can use that as they wish. And of course, this is a deep subject unto itself. But there's a wonderful book I want to just mention briefly by Butler Schaefer. He unfortunately died recently, but he had several different excellent books. One in particular I love is called Boundaries of Order. And it talks about property in relationship to relationships. And he makes the very important point that the concept of property makes no sense whatsoever if you're the last person on earth. Because if you're the last person on earth, well, there's no other person then to have that relationship of property with. So relationships are a very key way that we recognize that we have property, that we navigate the whole thing with scarcity. And, this is a very rich topic unto itself. I make a point that, we all know this, and we all can choose whether we want a more peaceful, cooperative relationship with other people, or we want a more antagonistic, hostile relationship with other people. And our default, actually, in most cases, is peaceful. And I like to use the example of driving on the freeway or expressway, as we sometimes call it here.
In England, we call it a motorway. So,
and you're traveling at speeds that could kill you, but you're assuming, and this is the key point, you're assuming that the other people have the self-interest in their own self-preservation, that they're not going to crash into you intentionally, and so that it helps you to navigate. And these are key points that we use in understanding how to navigate in the world. So these are what I call the surface level aspects of Austrian economics. And we can come back to them, and they weave in and out of the rest of the conversation easily. But there are 5 actual points that are brought out in Austrian economics that are key decision processes, or factors, I like to call them, that are involved in every decision that we ever make. And it's intuitive. No one has to be taught these. They're just, you can point them out, and it's valuable to point them out. And we'll get into that. But these are, of course, time, knowledge, risk, priority, and value. And in Austrian economics, they call these different things, different words like time preference, and priority is called marginal utility, which I've always objected to as a term. But you can understand these different concepts, but it always boils down to: do we need something now or later? Do we know about it? Do we not know about it? Is there a risk involved? Is there unknown risk involved? And then how do we prioritize that choice process? And this is the key word: choice. It's a choice process. Everybody knows it. And because of that, we all subjectively decide how much this thing is worth. And this is, of course, Andy, you can speak very eloquently about this on the concept of labor theory of value, and that something is not valuable just because of how much time and energy is put into it. It's really only valuable because the other person says, I'm willing to give up something for that. And that determines the value.
Can I just break in here? This is all sounding, I do like the Robinson Crusoe idea, which of course Murray Rothbard built up brilliantly in Man, Economy and State, so from Robinson Crusoe with no one near him to the New York Stock Exchange.
Sure.
But this is all, it's all a big dry subject, Austrian economics. It's big books like Human Action, Man, Economy and State, monetary theory, all these kinds of things.
Right.
Isn't life navigation something that's better done with meditation, with neurolinguistic programming, with books from America, from Californians talking about the now? Why should people take these principles you're talking about and apply them to their lives on a more direct basis than just reading an Austrian economics book once a year?
Well, that's an excellent question. I like to point out that overlaying all these choices is something that we don't talk about in Austrian economics, but is fundamentally connected to the whole discussion of subjective value. And that has to do with the concept of emotions. And now we're getting into a different realm of how humans choose things, because even in these 5 different factors that I just mentioned, we prioritize them differently, and we prioritize them differently at different times of the day, different decision processes. It's like time becomes more important, risk becomes more important, knowledge or ignorance becomes more important, priority, all of these things. But there's an emotional component also. And one of the things that I like to point out to people is that all of this Austrian economic knowledge is very, very valuable to make the choice process more conscious, to make all of us not feel intimidated about other people, because everybody's going through this at the same time. It allows us to really recognize that in a peaceful, cooperative world, people are basically incentivized to actually give, like the freeway example, choose according to what's going to serve them and at the same time other people. Now, emotionally, I'm very, very attuned to the idea that I want a peaceful, cooperative world. And so for me, that sets a whole different set of priorities. I meditate and have twice a day for the last 50 years. I, in the early 70s, started studying transcendental meditation, became a teacher of it, studied with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, went to Europe a few times, studied with him in Switzerland and in Spain and so on. And I have treasured the value that I've gotten out of that, because it expands my awareness. It makes me more calm, gives me more value for my personal life. I exercise a lot, and you and I share that. We recognize the value of exercising, and several times a week I'm exercising a lot. And so all these other factors, whether they help us in our mental acuity or our ability to deal with stress or general health or whatever it is, they're all extremely relevant. How we prioritize them is completely personal. And so I think the crossover between the knowledge of meditation, the principles of various different philosophical schools, like I'm very deeply schooled in the Vedic school of knowledge, and Austrian economics, the touch points are extraordinarily close. And they really focus on one of the values, and this goes into the subjective values, but now we're talking about something a little different. We're talking about shared values. And we as people, we're very tribal. We like to be with people that basically think the way we think, and where we don't feel so challenged all the time. But I want to make another point on that while I bring that thing up. One of the things I love about Austrian economics, perhaps the most, is that it has given me these deeper and deepest layers of understanding of how to recognize logical fallacies. And because I was in the money business, statistical fallacies. It helped my mind become more attuned to recognizing the fraudulent way in which people can argue and so on like that. And it also demanded that I unlearn things. And this is something that you can speak to, and actually I think would be extremely relevant because, you know, in your, I mean, it's recent because I think you were in your early 20s, so it could have been only a few years ago that you made the decision that you were no longer going to be a socialist. And I'd actually, you know, like to hand the mic over to you and have you comment on that.
Oh, people do this to me, but it's a long story. I mean, I don't think our viewers have got the 3 hours necessary to get through it. I'll try and do a potted version.
Yeah.
Why did I give it up? I won't talk about how I became a socialist because it happens to a lot of people. You get sucked in by the state education authorities and you read their preferred books. So you know there's a problem in the world and they know that you'll see that there's a problem in the world. And then you think, the problem in the world is the rich people control the state and they use the state to keep the poor people poor and keep them and their people rich. So you've seen half the problem as a socialist, but you haven't seen the whole problem. And the whole problem isn't the rich people controlling the state. The problem is the state. And it takes a long time to see that because the reaction of most socialists is to take over the state, kick the rich people out of it, and then increase its powers massively to suppress those former rich people and then use the state as an instrument to make everything better for everyone else. And they don't realize, they can't see, they can only see half the problem, that the state itself is the problem because it's the only body which has that force. So how did I get to see the whole problem rather than just half the problem like most socialists? And it was mainly through just not accepting everything, just feeling a cognitive dissonance, reading 1984 by George Orwell, reading Animal Farm by George Orwell, reading another great book called An American in the Gulag, talking about the early Soviet Union and an American citizen who was trapped in the Soviet Union in the 30s. It was a real experience. I can't remember the guy's name. And instead of just pushing these cognitive dissonances aside and forgetting about them, or reading Brave New World as well, then going on a journey of exploration, eventually getting to, strangely enough, P.J. Rourke's Eat the Rich.
Oh, yeah.
Which is a great book. Yeah. And in the back of there's a list of further reading, I think about 15, 20 books. I can't remember. It's 20, 30 years ago since I read that book.
Yeah.
And in there was all sorts of things. How did America come to be? There was Atlas Shrugged was in there. And there was a few, there was Road to Serfdom, which is a very, very important book because it helps you understand how, because we always, when I was a child or teenager, you'd think Adolf Hitler's very right-wing, evil capitalist, and Stalin is very left-wing, evil communist. And yet when you examine their systems, they're identical. So how come one's far right, one's far left, but yet they're identical? And then you realize there's a circle, and the circle is totalitarianism, and the totalitarianism is the government wanting to take over. All governments are totalitarian. All governments would like to be totalitarian, but some of the Western ones, like the English governments and the American governments, have been suppressed by the people. They all want to become totalitarian. And so it's the state again, it's the totalitarian thing which links all these evil bodies. And I came to see this through reading these books in the back of Eat the Rich. And then in Ayn Rand, I read all of her books. So I got to her, it's like a kind of unfolding pyramid. And I got to her, and then I read all of her novels. Anthem's my favorite because it's short.
Oh, I like that one. Yeah.
The 4-hour John Galt speech I could do without. And she never explains, of course, what happens after John Galt becomes the leader of America. Right. And I wish she had written another novel to explain what America would be like. And I think she copped out on that one and gave up. She didn't want to talk about it. Just like Karl Marx not writing the final piece of Das Kapital because he knew it was all going to crumble, so he didn't write it, even though he had 10 years to do it. So read all of her novels, then read all of her non-fiction. And in one of those books, somewhere in one of them, The Virtue of Selfishness or something, I saw Ludwig von Mises' Human Action. And then I got to Human Action. And then I read Human Action in one go. I read it in a few days. Wow. I slept and I ate. But I just read it in one go. And it's a heavy book. Man, Economy and State is such an easier read, written by the Woody Allen of economics, Rory Rothbard. But Ludwig von Mises, he's basically writing in heavy German,
right,
with Greek and Latin intermixed, then translated in his head to English. It's heavy. It's super heavy. But I got through it, and as I got through it, it was like the Das Kapital I wish I'd read when I was an 11-year-old.
Right.
It was brilliant, and all the scales were falling from my eyes as he was explaining how Marx got it wrong, and by the end of Human Action I was almost a convinced Misesian. I had to read Socialism as well by Mises to wipe away the last tendrils of socialism. But that's the story. So grew up, became a communist, saw there was a problem with the world, didn't see the problem was the state, saw the problem was which group of people controlled the state at the time, the rich people. And then through a process of cognitive dissonance, then a journey of discovery, accepting I was wrong about something, because that's the key thing with most socialists. Most people, they cannot accept that they're wrong about something. Right. In fact, if they are wrong about something and you prove to them they're wrong, they'll hate you more for it.
Right.
Because they don't want their self-image to be challenged, whereas I was able to let that self-image be challenged, realize I was wrong, realized I'd been an idiot, realized I'd been stupid for 20 years.
Or indoctrinated.
And then discovered Mises.
Yeah. And, I think it brings up a couple of key points. Transformation, cognitive dissonance, these are buddies. They're in our minds, in our hearts. Everybody has them. And and I remember when I was early reading Mises and other Austrians, there were many times that I felt actually nauseous, where I don't want to believe this. I don't want to look at this. I was in the money business, and I recognized problems. And the funny part is that it was very uneven the way I evolved. I mean, it was kind of fits and setbacks and other things. And it took me a while. It took me a while to actually get through. It wasn't like a single, lightning bolt, like our dear departed friend Yuri Maltsev, who told us that he was a student in college in the Soviet Union, and he told me that somebody gave him a contraband copy of Road to Serfdom and a flashlight, and he stayed up all night and read it at risk of being put in a Siberian prison camp, and then passed it on. It was being pushed around the group, and it changed his life. I mean, that alone. And you can imagine he was so isolated from this kind of thinking, whereas today it's so available. I mean, we'll talk maybe more later, but the library that is free, that is available online through the Mises Institute, is just astoundingly powerful.
I remember the story he told. It was when he became an economist, the GRU wanted him, which is worse than the KGB, and he managed to evade being hired by the GRU.
Right.
By going to Siberia, actually, and just working as a laborer, I think, for a while. He comes back to Moscow eventually when the GRU stopped looking for him to employ him, because he was obviously a genius. And then he ends up as an economist for the Soviet Union.
Right.
And then there was this, he said there was this library, a special library in one of the economics buildings that he worked in. And as he became more senior, finally he got a pass to this library.
Right.
So then he was able to get past the guards to go and read this stuff, this human action. And one of the most books they were most frightened of, Human Action, Man, Economy and State, and the Austrian books, they were the books they were the most frightened of. They were the ones they guarded, but they did let their economists see them, because they knew their economics was a mess.
Yeah,
and they had everything the wrong way around. And so, but now anyone in the world can maybe some people in certain countries can download from the Mises Institute the whole of the canon. Yeah. So for him to be reading under a bed cover with a flashlight, reading The Road to Serfdom, and again, seeing that half, knowing there's a problem in society, and then seeing the other half of the problem is absolutely incredible. What a guy. I'm still getting over the... You remember the story he told about the lipsticks and the condoms?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. He's escaping the Soviet Union in Sweden.
Yep. He'd go over there on a little diplomatic thing, and all the people would ask him to bring back condoms, and he'd fill his suitcase full of condoms, and get stopped at the
lipstick
border
as well.
Yeah,
I loved it when he finally did. What do you call it? He finally got out of the Soviet Union. Yeah, defected. That's the word.
Defected, right? Yeah.
So he ends up in Washington. He lands at the airport, but he still has to, even though he's a special kind of CIA person. Right. He still has to go through customs. Right. And so the American lady of customs opens up his suitcase. It's full of condoms and lipstick. Yeah. She shuts it and says, "Hope you have a nice time while you're here, sir."
Yeah. Oh, the stories, we could do a whole show just on Yuri's stories. I mean, it's amazing human being, an incredible scholar, an astounding voice for freedom. And I remember now, I warned you that I might tear up, just because I felt such a brotherhood with him. That
absolute disaster when I heard about him. His death.
I mean, it was very hard for me to attend the funeral, but it was important. But anyway, so so going back to this this basic idea of navigating our lives, and being able to recognize that we have a particular paradigm that we use to navigate the world is an extremely powerful thing. Understanding the mechanics of our own paradigms is very, very powerful, because it then puts it into a situation where our life is elevated to a choice. We can choose to follow these particular paradigms and the logical outcomes that they're going to cause or allow, or we can be open. And I think that's the key for me. What has Austrian economics done for me? It has opened my mind, my skill set to a much, much, much broader landscape. Back when I managed money, this was essential. And there was a saying I used to share with guys who were in the financial world, that academics and government people, of course, they want to be Keynesian. They want to control the economy. They want to, have a debt-based economy. But people who manage money really can't afford to not understand Austrian economics. Now, some of them try to capitalize on the Keynesian model. In fact, I would say most of them do. If you look at, I remember several money managers would say to me, and I would actually say it also, that if you tell me what the Fed's going to do, I can tell you what to do, because you have to understand that paradigm in order to navigate in the world, of money. But you also need to understand the Austrian paradigm also, and the ability to learn, and importantly, to unlearn something. And to be, as you were, I would say, not just brave, but courageous to face the fact that, I might be wrong with this. I'm holding on to this because it's a belief that I have. and then being able to have the tools of being able to, well, what is the construct of this belief? And how do I analyze evidence? And that becomes really key. Understanding logical fallacies. I put up a post on the blog recently about logical fallacies. That's key.
Yeah, can I just break in there? And one of my favorite stories related to this is a very wealthy money manager worth $50, $100 million spoke to me about this. He said, I have to understand the Fed because there's the real economy, how people really work, and that's Austrian economics. This is how people really behave. Even state actors are selfish and all the other things within their own little lives. But then he says you have to understand the big gorilla in the room with the machine gun, which is the Fed. Because although there's the real economy and how the real economy works, the big gorilla of the machine gun occasionally splatters the real economy with of fiat currency. And so if you understand that bubbles of chaos are going to arise. And when you get bubbles of chaos, you get bubbles in prices. And so then you buy at the bottom of the bubble and then you sell at as near as you can to the top. No one ever gets it perfectly right. So you sell as near as you can at the top of the bubble to make a huge amount of money. But you can only do that because there's this idiot gorilla in the room with a machine gun shooting fiat currency. But as long as you understand that, then you can anticipate what they're going to do, and then you can put yourself in a good position first. Then when their bubble of chaos turns into a bubble of prices, you exploit that bubble. And I think if the world was just purely Austrian economics and free market, and we didn't have these central banks, it'd be a lot harder for people to make money. Because there won't be these bubbles of chaos everywhere, which you can spot if you know what you're doing. So you do need the two levels of knowledge. You do need the really.
That's a very interesting point.
And the Keynesian.
That's a provocative point, Andy. You know, of needs. You know, if it was purely Austrian economics, it might be more difficult for people to make money. I would challenge that on a number of levels. I mean, if you look at little snippets of time in history, like from the late 1870s through 1914 or so, during that 40-year period of time, there was constant deflation in the world. I mean, in the United States. In other words, you knew that prices were likely to go down, and I'm talking about price deflation. Because that's the natural order of things. So what did that incentivize people to do? It incentivized people to save. And for retirees, that was a godsend. They could actually just save a certain amount.
Prices got lower.
And they would know that in 40 years, I would have enough money to sail off into the sunset. But of course, as the Weimar Republic pointed out, people who did that and lived their lives like that suddenly would find out that their savings, because they had converted away from gold and silver over to fiat money, their bank books wouldn't buy them breakfast. And so, if you look at that period of time, the entrepreneurship, the explosion of capitalism that always has a tail of influence, that it had an influence, that engine that sailed through decades into the 20th century, was, I think that there's a momentum that gets built from more sane Austrian economics. It is, I think, true, though. It's not as quick, and it's not as immediate. I mean, in a debt-based scenario, you can leverage yourself, and that's what you learn to do. You learn how to leverage yourself with debt. And money managers, business managers, they have to understand that in order to move their, because what is debt really? It's a transfer of time before you have to pay the piper. You buy your credit card, you buy your lunch on credit card, you're time shifting. That's what you're doing. You're not actually buying something with money that you have today. It's money that you believe. So it changes the psychology, the paradigm, the shared paradigm of everybody into a borrowing or a cash, a more immediate gratification, consumptive kind of
we're getting very wide here. Can I just bring it focus in a bit for anyone who's who's watching this? So actually, that reminds me of a story. I was working with an economist, a very Keynesian economist, and I said to him, "What if there was a situation where prices were constantly falling, and what would happen?" He said, "Oh, the economy would come to a complete halt." And I said, "Well, what about the entire Victorian period, where, except for wars, prices fell for like 100 years, and we had the Industrial Revolution massively ramping up? What would happen then?" And it never spoke to me after that. Didn't want me to remind them of
Right.
this thing that he thought was impossible was yet what created the modern world. But coming back to our listeners,
Right.
how can we use, for them as an individual, a lot of people don't trade and things, but they don't really know what they're doing.
Right.
They read a newsletter and do what the newsletter says, or they just follow their gut instincts, or they use this state-issued thing called money, which comes from the government, and they mess around with it in various ways. But how can somebody just use Austrian economics to make decisions to invest better
That's
for
an
their
excellent
pension
question.
or whatever they're
Okay,
doing?
well, the first thing I always tell people, because people ask me this all the time, and I've been saying I have basically this drum to beat. Number one, your number one asset is yourself. And that means your ability to create revenue, your ability to create value in the world. People will give you money if you create value in the world. You create a product or a service, and people like it, they're going to throw money at you because they want to see more of it. And so the key is to, number one, invest in yourself and recognize that you are your most important asset. Your time, your energy, your intelligence, your health, they're all vitally important. So prioritize those things. Recognize that you have to do that. Now, I come from the entrepreneurial, brain. My dad was an entrepreneur. I have been brought up in a wide clutch of other individuals that are entrepreneurs. But here's a couple of things you recognize. First of all, there is a distinct difference between an entrepreneur and an employee. And I'll give you a punchline first. Most entrepreneurs wind up as employees again. So employees is the way most people start. In other words, you need money now. You need no risk related to getting that money. You need to know that if you show up for work for the next 2 weeks, you're going to get a paycheck. So that's fine. Be an employee. Find something where you can add value to a business where they can reward you with that. And if you can, then go to the next step of being an entrepreneur. The main difference between an entrepreneur and being an employee is that the entrepreneur is willing to do two things and that a employee cannot do, and that is risk and wait. An entrepreneur has to risk their money, risk their time, and wait for the reward. They have to do that. And I want to give a call out to the author Jim Cox for enlightening me on that particular point. And the thing is, though, I would always tell college students when I'd have the opportunity to speak to them, I would say, since you are a college student, since you are a young person, you're not currently carrying a mortgage or having to support children and stuff like that, the habits that you create for yourself right now are so critical. And I would raise every eyebrow in the room and I would say, get in the habit of saving 50% of every dollar that you make. Live on or the other, but spend as little as you can that you need to, of course, and be comfortable, be happy, expand, and you'll find ways that you can creatively do that without spending a ton of money. But that capital that you save will actually give you enormous freedom in the future. And it is something that you can't appreciate now, but it is something that you will appreciate later. And if you want to later be able to start a business or an enterprise, then you'll have that capital. Now, of course, in this economy, if you've got a fantastic idea, you may be able to find people that are willing to lend you that money. You may be able to find people that are willing to give you their money to start it. That's happening all the time. But in the normal course of events, what serves a person best is to create life habits And the earlier you can do it, the better. Now, it doesn't mean that you're sentenced to destruction once you hit 50 or 60 or 70. There are ways that you can approach saving now. I have a friend involved in the life insurance business, and we know our, Bob Murphy, a scholar in the Austrian school, who's heavily involved in this insurance program. And I am not personally involved in it. I make no money in making this recommendation, but you guys can look it up and figure it out, track down Bob Murphy and other people that are involved in this.
Is that the Bob Murphy, as in Tom Woods and Bob Murphy? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
That's the guy. But the thing of it is that that's a program that uses, for example, life insurance as a savings mechanism. And frankly, I only recently in the last couple of years came to understand that. And I've made the comment that had I understood this back in the late 80s when it was available, but I did not understand it at that point or wasn't even introduced to it, I probably wouldn't have gone into the commodity world. I probably would have gone into that particular world because of the great value that has for people. In other words, don't feel like the ships have passed. Arm yourself. The knowledge of Austrian economics is fantastic. Ballvet's book, Fundamentals of Economics, is, I'm jumping ahead here, one of the most important introduction books that I think people can read. I wrote a little book 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and it was, Secrets About Money That Put You at Risk. All of the different things that I've written are really more designed to be study guides. It was a way to introduce people into the basics of money that most people don't know, even though most people worry about money all the time, but they learn about it almost never. But it more importantly gave people a reading list, a study list. And then I've written other books that have done the same. And so the concept of educating yourself, that is number one in terms of investing in yourself. And
yeah. I've just got a couple of other questions before we wrap up. And the first one is, again, you'd think life relationships and life navigation should be about thin California books you can get at airports. But how can you use Austrian economics to guide your relationships with other people?
That's an interesting question.
Can you, or
well, it's interesting.
How do you do it?
I'll tell you a couple of things. First of all, the first word that comes into my mind is patience. I mean, I would say that my relationship with my wife, with my children, with my friends has improved and deepened because of the patience that I have with them, recognizing that they're having their own process. Even our relationship, Andy. I mean, we've had our disagreements and times when you've sped ahead in me than I have in certain realms of the Austrian world, and it's taken me a while to catch up. And the ability to recognize that people prioritize what they're going to study, what they're going to learn, and when they're going to learn it, and how they're going to approach it is different. Now, it also, I would say, has created a sharper boundaries for me. Going back to Butler's book, Boundaries of Order, Butler Schaefer's book, I'm very keen on not listening to people that refuse to actually take another look. If they are stuck in their paradigm completely, and that paradigm is, I would say, not life supporting, not conducive to, it's more conducive to conflict. It's more conducive to hostile relationships. It sets the stage for that. I don't have to give that person much time, and I don't. And I give them less and less.
Yeah, there's a lot of libertarians like that, aren't there? The first thing they want to do is attack you and be aggressive. And I have no time for them and just dismiss them, which upsets them even more because I'm not taking them seriously because I don't take them seriously.
Well, I think there's when our dear friend Jeff Deist was thinking about becoming the president of the Mises Institute, which he recently left in the last couple of weeks, and now is on to other endeavors.
I got his last interview as president.
Yes, you did. And it's an excellent interview. I want to recommend it to everybody. But Jeff is a giant in the libertarian world. And he made a statement to me in our conversations that he wanted to create a big tent libertarian movement. And I think he did a lot to accomplish that. Because, when it comes down to what is a libertarian, I remember, gosh, this is 20 years ago. And I was seated with a government guy. And he started, we were having lunch. And he said to me, he said, the problem with you libertarians, and I held up my hand. I said, I gotta stop you right there. I don't like to be called a libertarian. I prefer to be called an adult with good manners, because that is my definition of what a libertarian is really about. It goes back to this concept of relationships. A major priority for me has been in my entire life to have a more peaceful, cooperative world. I see that we can create that. I see that people can create that, but it requires a lot of different things. It requires people to, it's kind of like I had a business. I had multiple salesmen, and they would ask me, well, what does it take to be a good salesman? I said, well, it isn't one thing, it's 10,000 things. But it boils down to, in this conversation, the one thing that people really want to have is they want to have a more peaceful, cooperative world. The study and the whole library of Austrian economics can amplify our ability to do that. I want to make one other point. I've had the great pleasure and privilege of attending a number of the events at the Mises Institute in Auburn, Alabama. You and I have been there several times together, and I look forward to us doing that again. But the
road trip, baby.
Yeah.
Road trip. Atlanta Airport.
That's right. Yeah, the great planes are calling our name. But anyway, but I remember a conversation I had with a young gentleman that had just graduated from school, and he had just graduated with a degree in accounting. And he was wondering, he asked me, what profession should I go into? And I said, without a beat, I said, if I were you, with your background already, the momentum you already have, I'd go into forensic accounting, because being able to provide the service to to companies to see the fraud, the statistical fallacies, the accounting fraud that is done in businesses is an enormous service. Frankly, it's by self-educating myself in that I survived 23 years in the commodity business without ever having a margin call, which is a major badge of honor that I hold, because I was able to, sometimes by the skin of my teeth and sometimes by luck, but I was able to avoid problems that I could see forming. And that's a key concept that you get from studying Austrian economics. You can see things earlier. You can see things more clearly. And it helps me in every other endeavor. I mean, it's helped me to understand the health fraud that we've recently gone through. And my writings that I've recently been putting up on LRC blog are primarily focused on that. And I invite the readers or the viewers to, check those out.
Just got one last question, really.
Yeah, cool.
People like Per Byland and a few other Austrian high level commentators have said the rise of AI is going to get rid of a lot of employees, because anyone who's a middle class, wealth earning person who makes their living from knowing technical things like doctors, programmers, lawyers, a whole host of others, are going to be put out of work by AI. Because if I need medical services, I'll just type into computer, these are my symptoms, what do I do? Right. That's a doctor gone. I need a contract. What should the contract look like for living where I'm living, and spits out a contract. Don't need a lawyer anymore. I need a website which does this, that, and the other. That's the programmer gone, and thousands of other jobs. So he thinks, and others think, I hope I'm not misquoting him, there's going to be more of a gig economy where we do a bit of work here, we do a bit of work there. It's all about personal relationships and jumping about. How can using Austrian economics and the principles of it help us navigate this new global gig economy?
Well, that's two questions, really. One is a comment I'd like to make about AI. There's no doubt that it's accelerating rapidly, and I'm watching that very closely. And I do consider it to be a force that we have to really contend with. And I do consider it, like many others, a potentially really dangerous force. And I think it should be approached with a lot more wisdom than it is. Now, having said that, will it replace important things? Some, I think probably. I can't forecast some, but I've been having conversations with doctors. I have a dear friend who's a radiologist, and we had dinner recently, and I asked him specifically about that. And he brought up one point that I think is the key word. It's nuance. He said, it's a tool that we actually have found to be useful in helping us understand things at a more deep level. It, in their case, it caught some things that they didn't catch, but did not understand the vital importance of it. And I think that that's a very important part of this process. This word nuance applies to so much. I mean, it's never going to replace art, because art is 100% subjective value and nuance. I mean, my wife spends most days in our barn that we remodeled. And when we remodeled it, she only wanted a quarter of the barn for her art studio. It's now half, so you see how that works.
Oh, the wonders of the female having a relationship with a lady.
And, it's funny when we have breakfast, I'm reading, often like Pear's book, new book, I'm reading verses or, segments of that. And she's, showing me little pictures of art that she's working on, or this video. Oh, isn't this cool? I'm going to mimic this, or I'm going to apply this, and so on like that. It's going to, I think the human potential movement is going to become more important when people recognize that humans have a incredible amount of creative intelligence. And this is something that I have studied deeply. And in fact, I've currently outlined a book on the concept of creative intelligence and Austrian economics, and that I've been working on. And because I do think that our creative intelligence can get augmented by Austrian economics, and there's principles of creative intelligence that we can learn that actually helps us to amplify the important things that we are learning from Austrian economics. So, there's a synergy in these things. And so, God willing and time allowed, I'm going to be, I've been working on this for some time, and I think I'll continue to work on it through its completion. Yeah,
I think nuance is key. A long time ago, I was a medical student for my sins. And I remember being shown a lot of radiology pictures. Andy, can you spot what the problem is in this one? No idea. It's just gibberish to me.
Right,
I had to leave the medical profession.
Right.
But AI pattern matching is going to say that little nodule there shouldn't be there. But the nuance will say, oh, is it good? Is it bad? Is it just something they've eaten recently? And how bad is it? And what can we do about it? So I think people are going to have to use nuance a lot more.
Right.
Again, I think with programming as well, the
right.
Chat GTP and GPT-4 can spit out code, but what should the code be? What should it look like?
Right.
Who's it for? What are the products that we're trying to sell? What's the look and feel? I think that's all still going to be in the hands
I think
of
important is
programmer.
What knowledge base is it referencing, because it's looking at knowledge base that's in the past, and as knowledge is accelerating, is it actually still self-learning? I don't know. It is actually very interesting. it's an interesting time to be alive. I think also there's another thing that it will cause, and that is more fundamental skills. I live in Southern Iowa. I produce a product with my Amish craftspeople. You own one. I, manufacture and sell these products, but these people are craftspeople, and craftspeople they are also artists. Now, I'm also including people that are metal workers, electricians, they're carpenters. They're not just people that throw buildings up or nail things to walls or stuff like that. They look at and understand and can modify proportion and priority in ways that I mean, nothing to say against the concept of modeling that is available, in the computer world. I had an uncle that worked for Ford for, 35 years and started off making model cars out of clay and then balsa wood, but then now it's all, done on computers. And, we can make conversation about whether or not it's of higher quality or not, but there's no doubt that there's a greater efficiency in the use of these things. But those, very smart idiots, which is what computers are no match in many ways to the slow geniuses that people are. And so we'll see. We'll just have to see how that unfolds.
I think a lot more people are going to get behind Elon Musk actually, and his fear of AI. But my cup of tea is nearly gone, so I think that means we need to wrap up. And we'll continue this conversation by a pool somewhere.
Yes.
In Auburn, in a hotel in Auburn, maybe in the future. So just before we wrap up,
sure.
To help people continue their education with Austrian economics and applying it to their life and their investment decisions and their emotional decisions and their relationship decisions, what further books, podcasts, resources can you tell people about that they should look at?
Well, number one is, of course, Mises.org, MISES.org. There's nothing better in the world. They got podcasts, they got books, they've got articles. Their daily output is truly astounding. And they are the principal resource. LewRockwell.com. That's LEW Rockwell.
Oh, that's self-publication there.
You bet it is. And you'll find me on that most days. I'm over in the lower right-hand corner of your screen, among all the other guys who are posting things there, and through that you can find more about me. But but in terms of be a sampler. There's so many different things that you can learn. I mean, I love Balve's book, Faustino Balve's book, Fundamentals of Economics. You can read that for free on Mises.org. When people want to learn economics and they want to read something short and quick and comprehensive, that's a wonderful book. He was a lawyer, and I believe, if my memory is right, he was Spanish but lived in Mexico. And it's a beautiful book. And then, of course, Murray Rothbard's book, What Has Government Done to Our Money, is one of my go-tos, for understanding the money world. Yeah. It's a great entree to that. These are what I consider low-hanging fruit. There's a number of other authors that I've recommended. Of course, there's the Uncle Eric books that are really designed for children. And I use those to homeschool our youngest daughter from the 6th grade on. And great story about that, just very quickly. I used those because I wanted to give her the fundamentals of money, economy, and logical fallacies. And so that was a couple of hours every week that she and I would spend on that. And at the end of the school year, the state of Iowa required that a state auditor come in and see what the child had learned in order for us to be allowed to homeschool.
Oof, how dare you?
Yeah, it was pretty miserable, but it was pretty cool because, so here's this meeting and there's this lady and here's Marina, my daughter, and here's myself, and I'm not allowed to speak. And the lady asks Marina, well, what did you learn that most impressed you this last year? And she said, well, I would say
that the state is evil, especially its inspectors.
This is cool. She said she wanted to know the three things. She said, well, if there was three things, I would say that number one, that there ain't no such thing as a free lunch because somebody always pays. And the second thing is the evils of fiat money. And finally, the abject fraud of fractional reserve banking. And the lady turned to me and she said, "What did she just say?" I said,
because the state inspector is not going to learn any of that, are they?
It was a wonderful moment. I love it.
How old was Marina again?
It was sixth grade. So how old is that? I don't know. 12.
Oh, I don't know, because I'm English. I've no idea about the American grade thing.
Yeah, 12 years old, something like that.
That's pretty good for a 12-year-old.
Yeah, pretty fantastic. Yeah, I'm very proud
I couldn't say something like that until I started reading Mises, which was post-30, so she's 18 years ahead of me. Okay, I think that's probably pretty much going to do it.
Actually, not quite 18 years, for you.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much going to do it. Okay. Is there anything else you just want to tell us? Any project you're on just before we wrap up completely?
No, actually, I thank you, Andy. I appreciate that. I as you know, my primary focus is on health because of the recent tyrannical fraud that was put down on the world. And I think the more that people can educate themselves about that, they're probably going to bump into some pretty radical stuff, and particularly if they read what I've written. And but I believe that it's very useful. It's totally going to empower you to have, I think, a much healthier world for yourself and better choices for yourself. And that's the thing that I think is most important.
And I'll put links to most of the things, if I can remember them all, that Michael's just told us about, but especially the link to his Lew Rockwell author page. It only remains for me to say thank you very much for your time, Michael. I'd like to thank all of you who've got this far. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, if you could link, share and subscribe and push this down as many social media channels as possible, that would be fantastic to help us push the message of liberty. So turning again to Michael, thank you very much, and I'll speak to you in Iowa soon.
I look forward to it, Andy. Always a pleasure. Thank you.